From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. Joining us this week are the familiar faces of Eleanor Clift, Clarence Page, Pat Buchanan, and Amber Athey, who is the Washington editor of The Spectator, a fine British publication that has spread across these shores. On that note, we shall get to our first issue, which is issue 1, Mailin Money Out.
President Trump this week threatened to withhold federal funding to Michigan after the state sent absentee ballots to residents across the state. Michigan says the action is necessary to protect voters who may face coronavirus infection if they attend the polls in person come November. But Mr. Trump says the action is unlawful, undermines voting credibility, and will not stand.
Pat, let's start with you as always. How do you see President Trump's threat here to Michigan? Is he concerned with something legitimate, or is this simply a way to try and prevent votes against him come November?
Actually, Tom, these were not ballots that were sent out because the name of the Vice President Biden's running mate was not on them. No, seriously. These were just applications for ballots sent out as a number of secretaries of state do. But what this episode brings us to is the realization is this is going to be a hellish battle, state by state, over who votes where, when. When you go into mail-in ballots, that has a potential for much more voter fraud than when you go to the polling place, get your ballot, put it in the machine. I mean, the postman's got to deliver it, then you're at home, you do it with the wife and family, and maybe folks come in, and you have something there, and then you give them to the postman. There's many, many steps in the process that lend themselves to real abuse. But the reaction here, and again, Trump made a mistake there, the reaction here tells us this is going to get into worse and worse political battle as we move toward the so-called conventions and the election.
Do you think the president is justified, Pat?
No, look, they did not send out the ballots. They sent out applications for the ballots.
Well, is his concern justified? Is his concern justified?
Look, the 7.7 million, if they were all ballots, would certainly have justified real problems. And you can't cut off the state of Michigan from federal aid.
All right,
so I think
Eleanor.
That was just a mistake, but it underscored a real coming problem.
Right, but Tom in his introduction referred to it as absentee ballots. It's going to be a, quote, mistake that people will slide over. What Michigan did is perfectly legal. I got my application for an absentee ballot here in the District of Columbia, which I requested. This is how it works. In 2016, 55 million people voted by mail. You have 5 states doing it entirely by mail, and I think 26 or 7 states you can mail in with no excuse. But you have a battle royale going on in Texas right now, where the Texas Attorney General is trying to insist that fear of or concerns about the coronavirus are not an excuse for not voting in person in November. He's just been overruled by a federal judge, which he will then appeal. And Pat is right to the extent that the Republicans are going to be challenging voter ID, voting practices across the country, because frankly, to put it straight, they can only win by suppressing the vote.
Amber.
Well, I think Republicans actually might be in the wrong by thinking that mail-in ballots would be damaging to them. They have actually several advantages here. First of all, the Republican base tends to skew older, and those people are much more comfortable with an absentee ballot system. They know how it works. They generally know how to request the ballots and how to mail them in. My generation of millennials and the Zoomers as well don't really do snail mail very often anymore. Most of their access to the world in terms of banking or paying bills, things like that, is actually online. So they are going to have a harder time turning out younger voters with this type of system. And that's not to mention that Donald Trump has had 3 years now to build up a digital operation, whereas the Biden campaign really doesn't have much of a digital operation at all. They only have about 25 staffers.
Clarence.
Yeah, we've actually seen Republicans scored significant victories lately in California, a couple of races there. and other states that have Republican states like South Carolina have put in for absentee balloting, and it's growing across the country under these current pandemic circumstances. At the same time that President Trump is shaking his fists and stamping his feet over how Republicans can't win with this kind of balloting. He has not done his homework once again, and I think there's not much that Democrats have to worry about here compared to a lot of other races I've seen in the past. But this is something, whenever you try to figure ahead of time who the system is rigged in favor of, it turns out not to be the case quite often. I think that's happening here.
You know,
Clarence is very familiar with the situation in Cook County, Chicago.
So I've heard.
Remember
yes.
the 1960 election, as recall, the graveyards and the river wards, everybody came out, didn't they, to give that presidential election to Jack Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson, his vice president, won a state Senate seat by 87 votes in the state of Texas before it was as enlightened as it's become today, Eleanor.
well, you know, President Trump is doing something else in fraud. It's about raising issues about whether the election is going to be rigged in some way or another. It's what he did in 2016 before he actually won, and he's laying the groundwork for potential lawsuits if there are close elections and he can claim fraud here, there, or everywhere. And as I said in my earlier remarks, it's a wider voter suppression effort. The RNC has lawsuits in many critical states trying to erect more voter ID barriers, going after purging the voter rolls. I mean, it's a wider strategy. And when Brad Pascal, the president's campaign manager, gave him some bad numbers a couple of weeks ago, apparently what buoyed the president was to know there were all these lawsuits in the works trying to, again, make it harder for certain groups of people to vote.
Okay, Amber, you can have the concluding comment.
Well, this is certainly not something that's exclusive to the president or Republicans. Democrats have already suggested that the election will be illegitimate, again, because of things like Russian interference, which was a tactic they tried in 2016 that ultimately failed. And they've been claiming over and over again that Trump won't respect the election, even that he'll delay it because of coronavirus, which he's already said he doesn't plan to do. So this is going to be a tough battle across the board with both sides trying to call into question the legitimacy of this thing. And I think for good reason. There's, of course, the potential for voter fraud from the mail-in ballots. And then there's also everything in terms of the coronavirus and how that will affect the system is going to raise a lot of flags for people.
Move on. I think two little points I'd make. One, I can't really understand why Democrats are so concerned with some of the basic sort of voter identification stuff. A lot of countries in Europe, social democracies, have that. Doesn't seem to be a problem there. On that note, we should go to issue 2. Who got a letter?
The letter is a very detailed, long letter, but basically they have to clean up their act. They have to do a better job. They have to be much more fair to other countries, including the United States, or we're not going to be involved with them anymore. We'll do it a separate way.
President Trump says that the World Health Organization will lose all U.S. funding worth tens of millions of dollars per year should it not accept major reforms to its operations. The president says the action is necessary in the context of what he accuses as the organization's failure to objectively address the coronavirus pandemic. The WHO, Mr. Trump suggests, is a Chinese poodle.
Eleanor, does the president have any legitimacy in terms of the quite sort of forensic documenting he has in this letter?
Well, first of all, I would put this under the heading of another empty threat. Congress has appropriated the money. If the president makes this happen, I don't think he's going to follow through. Secondly, it's incredibly short-sighted. My mother would have said it's like cutting your nose off to spite your face. China just pledged $2 billion to the World Health Organization. It's just stepping off the world stage and not taking a leadership role in the biggest health threat to face the planet in a century. I mean, it's totally ridiculous.
Wait a minute.
Eleanor. I get to finish. The World Health Organization answers to the countries that support it. And they didn't do everything perfect with China. They deserve some criticism. But they have been doing a lot of things right, and the rest of the world depends on them. It's a critical organization.
Pat.
Tom, Eleanor, you give the World Health Organization a B plus, and the Chinese maybe a B plus or an A minus in their performance here. China is primarily responsible for this total and complete disaster. The World Health Organization was right in the tank with them, was defending them, praising what they were doing when they were unleashing this virus on the world. The World Health Organization, I credit Trump, I agree to this extent. He said he's cut off the funding temporarily, and he's going to do it on a long-term basis. Conditionally, we ought to get rid of the man that's running this, Tedros the Ethiopian, who's in the tank for the Chinese. And I do believe there is a role for the World Health Organization, but if it's not reformed, we ought to shut it down or defund it and build a new one. And that's not only the American view. There are countries all over the world that want to know why the Chinese role in this has been covered up.
Clarence, when you look at the letter, I mean, isn't there a point here from the president's side that actually the failures of the WHO under Chinese pressure to bring the full attention of the world to what was happening, why, surely this plays into why Americans have so much skepticism of multilateral institutions, no?
I haven't seen the skepticism, Tom, and Pat talks a lot tougher than the White House does on this, frankly.
No skepticism.
The WHO, the WHO is an organization of lots of countries, including our own, and they try to be as even-handed as possible. So they're not going to be as tough on China as we might like for them to be. That's just the way they operate. But nevertheless, there are some areas of reform that the WHO could take, and I think it's going to happen. I bet President Trump couldn't tell you what they are, though, because he's never specific about what's wrong with the WHO. He started talking about it at a time when it was convenient to take attention away from the White House's slow response to the coronavirus crisis, and try to find somebody else to blame, which is kind of standard Trump style, and it's happening once again.
Okay, Amber, I saw you smiling there as Clarence was speaking.
The World Health Organization is an organization that answers to the people who support them. Eleanor is right on that point. But the problem is who is supporting them, and it's China. Tedros was pushed into this position. He was elected with the support of China. Back when he was the Ethiopian health minister, he was constantly touting China's investment in that country. And in return, China apparently placed him into this position, despite the fact that he was the first World Health Organization director to not be a medical doctor, and he was accused of covering up multiple cholera outbreaks in Ethiopia. So this is a person who is, of course, going to bend to China whatever they want, because they're the ones who got him this position in the first place. And America is perfectly capable of being a leader on the world stage without bending to an institution that lied to the world about the scale of this pandemic, as well as some of the the way that it spreads, whether it's spread from human to human transmission or what have you, and has aggressively covered up for China. China pressured the World Health Organization not to declare this a World Health pandemic back in January, and the World Health Organization decided to go with China on that. Not to mention that the World Health Organization still hasn't been able to go into China in order to conduct an investigation into the origins of the virus. So we shouldn't be taking this institution seriously at all.
Yeah,
the United States was in there with the WHO all along.
As I recall, there was a lot of bending on the part of the president to China in February and into March when he was negotiating a trade deal, and you could do a nice little ad with all the flattering things he said about China. And it wasn't the World Health Organization who pulled out American scientists from China. That was the Trump administration. So again, under the heading, distract, this is another distraction.
Eleanor, I do not understand how you can exonerate the Chinese Communist Party in China.
Let Pat speak. Let's Pat.
And I do not understand how you can exonerate them for primary responsibility for this disaster that has hit the entire world when they were covering up for it, and their friend at the WHO was doing the same.
Also, this idea that we should
Well,
be
let's
lending
let-
our scientists.
Let's let Eleanor finish, and then I'll come in.
I'm
Back
not
to you.
exonerating. They did plenty that was not correct, but they
Not
are a
correct.
necessary organization. And Donald Trump did a lot that was not correct. And he bought into the Chinese line for a very long time, saying they were doing a good job. So this is about finding a scapegoat to distract the American people from the fact that the president did virtually nothing in February and March to slow the halt of this pandemic. And the Columbia University survey that came out today that shows that 37 or 38,000 lives would have been saved in this country if we had started mitigation just a week earlier. So
How many lives would have been
divide
saved if the
and
Chinese
distract.
had told the truth?
All right, let's go to Amber.
I think it's absurd to say that the US is required to supply their scientists to China, considering China has been stealing intellectual property and research from the United States for decades. They've been putting Chinese nationals in the university system, in the research system, stealing research secrets and taking them back to the Chinese Communist Party. So this idea that we are required to cooperate with them when they've repeatedly been a bad actor is just something that shouldn't even be entertained. I think Trump was right to pull those scientists.
All right,
Amber,
Clarence.
you and Pat, would you like to just have us pull out of the WHO altogether? I don't think, I mean, knowing Pat,
No, Clarence, what I would do, I'd say
Let Clarence
reform, or
finish.
we're going to cut it off and we're going to get a new organization.
All right, Clarence.
get a new organization, right? I mean, this is the isolationist approach to the WHO. But the fact is, we want to try to increase our influence on this planet, as Amber was alluding. And I don't think pulling out of the WHO is the best way to do that. And the same thing with the intellectual property dispute. That's a long and complicated dispute. The United States still wants to do business with China, and we need to work out that issue separately. It's not a health issue.
Yeah, and having scientists embedded in China is not, I mean, that's the smart way scientists cooperate. That's how you know what's going on. That's called intelligence gathering. That's, you know, that.
But there's a, I mean, isn't there a
have a presence there?
Yeah, but China has not let in American scientists and shared the data still, to the degree that we would wish, right?
No, I think there have been Americans. There's CDC people have been over there.
We haven't had access to those labs,
Right.
though.
Yeah, and it actually took
Talking
China
about
at
by
least
degree.
2 months to allow the CDC to enter.
All right, let's move on. Issue 3, partisan divide.
With just 6 months to go until Election Day, a new CNBC Change research poll found battleground state voters are sharply divided in their judgment of President Trump and Democrats' handling of the coronavirus pandemic. But while most voters say President Trump will be to blame if a second wave of infections occurs in the fall or early winter, the poll also suggests that Mr. Trump holds a 48% to 46% battleground lead over Joe Biden.
Clarence, if, as we see in those polls, if we're to believe those polls, how is President Trump doing so well or sustaining this little lead, even as a lot of the media attention is so negative?
Boy, it beats me, Tom. No, seriously. That's about the same percentage President Trump has kept throughout his presidency. He has yet to top 50%, but that doesn't seem to bother him because he's content to be able to hold his base together, which can run anywhere between 40 to 48%, depending on the week or the times. And it's something that it's a rock solid base. He is not a reach out coalition builder. Which is a different way to run for president. I thought he was going to lose last time with this tactic, but the Electoral College saved him. We'll see if he's able to pull it off the same way this time. Biden's got more to worry about. Amber's absolutely right about there being behind the digital divide out there, which Barack Obama's campaign really pioneered many of these digital efforts. And now President Trump in his second campaign is going even deeper into cyberspace with various types of, various ways of reaching his base and building it without really worrying about anybody else. And it's going to be a tough race. Biden does need to get out there and raise his profile.
Tom, I'll tell you what I think the problem is. I saw a poll today that showed Biden running ahead nationally by 1 point and winning the largest state in the union, California, by 28 points. That tells you where Biden's strengths in. Now, Biden, if you take Illinois, if you take New York, if you take California. Biden is going to win these by a tremendous blowout, so you can take them almost off the scene and look at the battleground states, and it's there that Donald Trump is running a basically even race. And I agree with Clarence on Amber's point. Much about this campaign is going to come down to the quality and character of your organization, how advanced it is, how it can get its votes out, and if it's mail-in ballots, how it can go to work on that. So I think in a sense, the polls might show Trump down by 10, say, or something like that. But right now, this is a very close race, and I would not bet too heavily against the Donald.
Well,
Eleanor.
they're running the same playbook as 2016. They don't want this to be a referendum on Trump's leadership and on his handling of the coronavirus. They want to discredit Joe Biden, and they had a $10 million ad buy that began the second week in May, which portrays Biden in very unfavorable terms. And they've got the U.S. Senate now embarking on an investigation into Benghazi. Oh no, it's not Benghazi. Sorry, I guess it's Burisma. It's Benghazi all over again. And I'm sorry, I just don't think the American people are stupid enough to want to vote on a phony investigation 4 years ago and total character attacks. They want to vote on what this country is doing to improve the economy and how this administration is trying to keep them safe. People are scared. This weekend, with most of the states opening up to some degree, it's a test not only of whether the virus will make a comeback, and we won't know that for a couple of weeks, but it's a test of whether people are really going to come back out. Are they going to come back out in enough numbers that these small retail establishments can survive? So the president is betting his presidency on reopening America. There's a lot of question marks on that between now and November.
Amber.
Reopening America is a good strategy for the president because we've seen polls over the past couple of weeks show that people's number one issue is shifting back to the economy from healthcare. And healthcare was fundamentally a losing position for Republicans. It was, of course, what propelled the Democrats to take back the House in 2018. And since then, the Republican Party has yet to release a full-blown healthcare plan to compete with Democratic calls for a public option or for Medicare for all. The economy, however, of course, is Trump's bread and butter. It's part of what caused him to win in 2016. And especially as we're coming out of a pandemic and looking to reopen the economy, the American people certainly trust Trump more for that than they would Biden.
Is one of the challenges here, though, Amber, that the president, if there is a second surge of viruses come October, it would serve as his effective October surprise, and potentially people say, this guy has put our lives at risk. I mean, do you not think that the White House has to grapple with that risk?
Yeah, they absolutely do. And I think part of the way that they're mitigating that is by putting the decision to reopen on the individual states. So Georgia, Florida, South Dakota have been reopening much quicker than places like New York or even California. And so if there is a second wave in some of these states, Trump can easily pin the blame on the governors instead of taking it himself because there hasn't been a federally united response.
Who is goading those governors into opening up? I just don't think the president can fully deflect that blame. And he will be running for re-election when probably at least 150,000 Americans are dead by then. And God knows how many coronavirus cases. He can't say that's one and done. Now we're into reopening America. It's not good enough.
Well, look, I've been saying for a couple of weeks now that when the opening up was a minority view and a very minority view, that's going to change. And it has changed dramatically. All 50 states have opened to some degree.
Okay, let's do some predictions.
The Democrats are going to be in serious trouble in the fall because of this negative attitude they've taken toward opening up, and the negative attitude, things are going to get worse. Eleanor says 150,000 dead. And the Republicans are going to say, they are almost praying for the worst situation in the world in the hopes that it will bring down Donald Trump. And I think that argument that the Democrats are basically against the public and national interest here because of their political motivation, I think that's going to be a rising argument on the conservative movement and Republican Party.
All right, Eleanor?
My prediction is kudos to the Lincoln Project. They know how to get under President Trump's skin. Their ad this week is masterful, pointing out how much money Brad Parscale is making off of the president. It's one thing that really bothers Trump. It's people making money off of him. He wants to make money off of everybody else. So it's a beautiful thing to watch.
Clarence.
I think Democrats are going to be happy to hear that President Obama is going to campaign more on behalf of Joe Biden. They will not be happy with how little he'll campaign with Joe Biden, however, simply because it's Joe Biden's campaign. The surrogates can only help you so far, and it's still going to be up to Joe to bring it home.
Amber, your prediction.
I think the media is going to dig their own hole once again. Just like Pat said, they are looking down condescendingly at people who want to reopen more quickly because their livelihoods are affected. And they're going to see people who have managed to have jobs throughout this entire crisis peering down at them from their ivory towers and having the gall to call them racist or not caring about other people because they want to be able to provide for their families.
All right, my prediction is that everyone should keep a close eye on the South China Sea. China has been sending up fighter jets to intercept American spy planes over the South China Sea. The US Navy is now sending the Teddy Roosevelt carrier strike group probably into the South China Sea after it's been cured of its coronavirus infection. There's a potential in the context of real tensions between Beijing and Washington for even a potential skirmish there. So something to keep an eye on. Anyway, thank you for watching.